Of all the very difficult things we've heard in those first two readings, the one that sticks out to me is that we really might not be the people for the message. Which of you, intending to build a tower, does not first sit down and estimate the cost to see whether they have enough to complete it? I took that personally. There's a lot of work to do around here, a lot of towers to be built. But we might be exactly the people who need to hear today that God has put before us a choice: life and blessing, or death and curses. And if we stay with the interplay of these texts, the choosing of life will mean losing the way the world has told us is normal, and maybe even potentially secure, which is terrifying, right? Losing family values, tradition, even honoring our father and mother, it says in the gospel. Jesus' cross today is not a metaphor. It is the fate of the defiant around him and of the faithful, the ones who choose to be liberated. Next week, here we get to celebrate United Nations Sunday, as we heard earlier. We're very excited to have it back. It is a long tradition in this place. It includes the President of the General Assembly in this pulpit, and in many years, the United Nations Symphony Orchestra, made up of people who work for the United Nations. Annalena Baerbock of Germany is the president of the 80th Assembly, our preacher. The United Nations was established in 1945 after generations of war. The 1900s, the 20th century, marked by war. Wars for and between empires that involved much of the planet. World wars, they were called. Wars that devastated and continue to devastate American families and people all over the planet. Wars that can start to feel romantic or nostalgic or purpose-driven because we learn about them in film and biographies of people who performed heroic acts, both at home and abroad. War, as the journalist Chris Hedges writes, a force that gives us meaning and purpose like nothing else. And not superficially, not because we're silly, but viscerally, at every level, we are together in war. We know what we are fighting. We know why we exist. In the meaninglessness of contemporary society, marked by not being able to get enough to be secure, your dignity in war is guaranteed. So I am anxious to hear from this pulpit the language of peacemaking from someone who has spent their entire lives working on it at the international level. I want to hear the leaders of the world take responsibility in conversation about the common good, always most impactful for the smallest territories and countries, and yet controlled by the agendas and vetoes of the most powerful like us. The United Nations stands to remind us that we have the choice of peace in every generation, always, almost always maybe, the most complex choice. And we absolutely have the responsibility of building the generational structures and institutions that will make for peace, even when we ourselves already live in peace, when it might not seem like our work. Because if we do not do it, we are preparing for war, internationally and upon our own people. The biblical writers stare at us across the millennia with this shared concern, and Jesus tells us what it will look like to follow this path of liberation, his path, under an imperial order. Remember, he lived under Rome. Nothing that should matter in a peaceful time, he says, will matter. Your parents, who you should honor, your siblings who you love and love you, the web of relationships that shore you up against the chances and changes of life, even in peaceful times, the grain in a storehouse, the savings account, that means you are taking responsibility for yourself, maybe even relieving a burden for the future. If we live in a nation committed to war, everything in our lives is entangled in it, the making of war, and we cannot be free, Jesus says. Leave it all behind, Jesus says, and follow me to your cross. It is absolutely as simple as it sounds, and friends, many of them did exactly what he describes. And as we sit, staring back across the millennia at them through these words, and through them back to those writers who put down the words of Moses, recording it generation after generation on scrolls to be read in synagogues, the flick of a beautiful writing instrument on parchment, carrying the wisdom of haunted generations, haunted by war. The ways of God are liberation and peace. Your God who guided you out of the slavery of the Egyptians, your God who made you a free people in tents in the wilderness, your God who is deciding whether or not to settle with you when you finally do. God who stays in that tent for a good long time after the people build their homes and establish their people in a place of security. God who names that outsiders have already joined them in the wilderness and work alongside them. They are not homogeneous in any way. Their God who says, remember the alien, the widow, and the orphan so many times that we don't even see the words alien, widow, and orphan. God who says you are not free to do as you wish in your freedom. You are free to live in covenant with me, your liberator. And the writers add, or else. What does covenant with your liberator God mean would be a fair question. In the section we have from Deuteronomy, and we're at the end of Deuteronomy 30, Moses stands at the cusp of the end of the wilderness journey. He will die soon and rest with his God on the mountaintop from which he can see the place where the people settle. A land of promise, it says, a promise he is now doing his best to explain. The promise is not for ultimate protection forever. It is a promise of covenant relationship with God, and the exchange is building a society that develops peace and justice actively, creating human meaning, not by being acquisitive or empire building like the neighbors, or greedy or a desperate people making war among themselves and with outsiders, but by leaving a share of their labor for the hungry among them. Already there were weaker and stronger among them. They are to create a place of listening when there is conflict, care for those who have none to care for them, even seriously acknowledging the power of who has a right to whose bodies, differently than we would do it today, but noted in Deuteronomy, the place of the individual body matters in the work of peace, we read in the Bible, and we know today. Choose life, Moses says. Choose to build a society worthy of the God who has freed you. Christians say it slightly differently, but only slightly. We use the word salvation, and it means the same thing, liberation and freedom, the encounter with the interconnectedness of holiness that frees you from the illusions this world has placed upon you that separate you from your dignity in God, the dignity you share with all of creation. Some traditions follow that with a bunch of ways for you to be worthy, but we've been reading Galatians recently, and so we know that we come to this table, we bask in the presence of holiness here, where we are seen and known, and we take God into ourselves, and we are changed. And these times require us to also ask, be changed for what purpose? The ways of peace can feel like folly today. This week, our nation bombed a vessel of another nation, and not because we were being attacked. The United Nations exists to create an international order, a rules-based order, words, so that the whims of one nation's leader or an accident do not lead to international conflict. The United Nations exists to prevent this. It assumes that we do not want the horror of war in our generation. But we are a nation in which our president on social media has declared war on Chicago. And thank God there are strong leaders all over this nation. But as we are seeing around this country, federal forces are acting in our states in ways that disrupt our own golden calf, our economy. Maybe our false gods are changing, or new ones being revealed, and we need to be vigilant to understand. Workers are being taken at work, not gangbangers in a shootout, but the unhoused in their tents, laborers waiting for work, actual workers while at work, students doing their visa paperwork. Why? Because the violent hellscapes that we are told are our cities is so far from the truth that to justify the National Guard walking around in jungle fatigues in our bucolic urban and suburban neighborhoods, they have to find people to arrest. So they are violently arresting people working to make electric cars and nutrition bars. You have a choice before you, life and death, prosperity and peace, but it is work to build cultures of peace and humanity, and it is our work together. Our tent-dwelling God does not take up residence in the temple of his people for generations. Remember, because our God will not be used to bless war and greed and cruelty. Malia, mother of third grader Vivian, who was shot in the mass shooting at Annunciation Church School in Minnesota, calls out for a ban on semi-automatic weapons in response to the shooting that almost took her daughter's life. She describes the daily excruciating changing of the dressing of her 8-year-old's wounds on social media and recordings on the news, and pleads with our nation to ban one type of gun, just one. And this week you can watch as a tall residential tower in Gaza, just bombed, crumbles, home for hundreds, just gone. Like you can watch attacks on the hospital that we all support with our Good Friday offerings in Gaza, and you can watch a lively debate online about what constitutes genocide. But let us never be recorded for such folly. How much despair can we bear to witness and explain away when the wilderness time of Palestinians is documented to us from the Nakba to today? There is no confusion about what we see and what has been taken. The only debate is when the United States will stop vetoing the will of the world's nations, the vast majority of whom, through the United Nations, through words, civilly, have called for intervention and relief for Palestinians since the 1950s. Will the U.S. veto, under Democratic and Republican leadership, that veto the will of the United Nations until there is no Palestinian left on the land? Is there suffering like that little Vivian suffering? Not enough. Is no sacrifice enough? There are many ways to define false gods. Some have names in the Bible. It's very interesting how well the Bible knows us and sees us today. In our society, one of our gods are guns and weapons. We are so deeply tied to those industries in every way that we make money and that we make meaning in this nation. We have literally, not figuratively, chosen a solely death-dealing tool as the symbol of our freedom to kill, to harm, as we choose, industrialize, and extended to war. The biblical writers were telling us a truth. We have choices that will have repercussions for us all. The occupation in the Palestinian territories is coming to us fast. Over-policing has turned into occupation by the military. We are living it. If you live far from where it is happening, or if it isn't happening to you, this might sound hysterical. But here it is now our friends and neighbors who know someone or are someone with work papers, with visas, and without, who are working at a job that needs workers in our communities who have been detained. It is the logic of occupations. All of us are potentially an enemy within. This week, the House of Bishops of the Episcopal Church is meeting, not quite the United Nations General Assembly, but our voice, and in many ways a symbol of all of us. In these truly historic times, many of them who got into this racket with us to pray with us, and I give them credit for that, they meant to pray and love us. And they might feel overwhelmed and maybe even disoriented in these political times, thinking about who we are in the world, what our witness in the world means, what it can do. Who cares what we say, I've heard them say before. And may I offer from this place why it matters what you say, this place that has stood up in so many important movements of this time, unlikely to change. And then there was change. Peace is work. It is made. It does not appear because we simply pray or win a war or an election. It requires work of all of us. We know this in faith communities. Peace in our hearts, peace in our homes, peace in our streets, peace among people, peace among nations. It is all of our work, all of us taking our part. And the church has always been a significant part of that work. We have a part to play because we follow one who is called the Prince of Peace. He is not the Prince of Public Safety or the Prince of thinking about unifying things, not even the Prince of tall towers and very big buildings, though I kind of wish he was when I stand here. The Prince of Peace puts his followers in the midst of the people who must cry out for peace for the sake of their lives, the people impacted by war and violence and poverty. The Prince of Peace wishes to reign in Gaza and the West Bank, in Jerusalem and Ukraine, Congo and Sudan, in Ethiopia and Myanmar, in El Salvador and Venezuela and Chicago and Baltimore and Los Angeles and Savannah and New York. This means we must speak to the things that devastate and tell the plain truth. We must. These are historic times in our nation and in our world. If you wish to have choices that give you meaning, here you are. And they have always been conflicted, those choices. The soldier who kills another eye to eye sees a peer, however they tell the story later. The Israeli soldier among the starving Palestinians cannot hold on to their humanity if they must see their neighbor as fundamentally only a threat to them. And we know from those soldiers it is devastating, to say nothing of Palestinians impacted directly in watching the devastation of their people. We must do the work of peace for all of us. Wherever you find it, here it may feel like a soft work of relationship and storytelling, of building hope and heart among us ordinary people, and courage for those in power. So to our bishops on our behalf, please tell us the hard truths, do your part. Congregation, I know we will. And it is a paradox. It can be argued that it is nothing. It can feel like nothing to write some words on paper, to speak them here. But it is the tool we have. It is the currency we trade in. Words like the United Nations Charter and treaties, a rules-based world order, so that we may prepare a harvest of peace for the future. And it can feel like losing everything, Jesus tells us. We will be called anti-Semitic. We will be called anti-American. We worry that means what it means for our personal safety. We might lose supporters, and we have tall towers to support. And not to be grandiose, but Jesus has told us what faithfulness will cost. So let me take you back to that first scene as you offer your prayers. As Moses prepares to leave his people, God says through Moses to this nation of former slaves and those who chose to travel with them, you will have choices before you, blessings and curses. Choose life that you and your children may live. Amen.